Welcome back, subscribers. In this video I'm taking a look at Le Mans Ultimate, and I'm going to be telling you all the things that are currently great about it and all the things that are not so great about it following its latest update and new DLC 3-pack, which brought with it a bunch of new GT3 cars, some of them that you have to pay for, one of them's free, and then a whole host of other changes, online system, physics changes, and a bunch of other tweaks and polishes. Now we'll begin with the positives, but before we do, remember, you can subscribe to this channel, and that brings with it the power to be able to unsubscribe, which is great when you inevitably get annoyed by us being too critical. Those of you that want to, you can also click the like button, but you don't have to. So, the positives, let's start there, and let me begin by saying you really can see how much polish has gone into Le Mans Ultimate since it first launched. And I do think now it actually is very much a 1.0 good, stable, solid game. Crucially, when we first started playing this update, the thing we noticed first was that the menus run really nice and smooth, the game performs really smooth, frame rates were better, everything just operated a lot better than it did at launch. It actually feels like quite a nice piece of software to use. And I also think the graphics and the actual visual presentation of this game is really nice. It doesn't have the flashiest of shaders and effects and everything that you might find in Automobilista 2 or other titles on the market, but whenever I play this, it has a really nice kind of solidity and scale and just vibe and feel to the graphics that gel really nicely with me. Though I'm a bit of a dullard when it comes to simulators, and I actually quite like how stuff like iRacing looks, though I realise that's not everyone's taste. But I think this just has a really nice, neutral and solid appearance to it. Like, you look at the sky there, looks great, clouds look nice, road looks nice. It looks kind of what you'd expect things to look like in reality, as opposed to some over-the-top cinematic interpretation. And then, just all the track details, the car models, all that stuff is absolutely superb. I would also say, since we're talking about some of the visual and subjective things, the external car sounds are really, really nice. When you're in the track, in the pit, and you hear the ambient sounds, when you're in your car and another car goes past you, that is really nice and immersive, and again, for me, really makes me feel like I'm actually driving a race car. And I have to say, though there were some teething problems when the update first rolled out due to a load of people jumping in to try it out, one of the really, really nice things with Le Mans Ultimate is that it has its built-in ranking system right in the game. So if you buy Le Mans Ultimate, you can install it and you can go to multiplayer, and straight away there'll be like hourly races with GT3 cars and LMP2 cars. You can build up a rank, you can build up a license, and then you can also do, once you've got high enough license, you can do longer races or some of the special events. And that's all just in the game. So you don't have to fiddle around trying to find decent servers and leagues and things. It's much more along the lines of what you find with iRacing, in that, assuming you've got a subscription, you've spent a few £1 billion, you can then jump in and get a race. And with this update, now you actually have more vehicles and GT3 cars, which is what a lot of people are looking for. Now, of course, you can still play ACC and use LFM with ACC, and that is cheaper, and I think it has more car. Well, it has more cars and more tracks, but that's still a little bit of a fiddle and not quite as streamlined as this. Though I would highly recommend getting ACC and iRacing. I play all the simulators, and I think they all offer different things. So, you know, but the point is, this is a nice package, all in one place. Fantastic. Then when it comes to the online racing and the quality of the online racing, unlike iRacing and unlike ACC, LMU has really good netcode for car contacts and aggressive driving. It doesn't have as much smoothing as iRacing, so sometimes cars can look a little bit bobbly and a little bit warpy in some ways, but for the most part it looks super duper solid, and you can have car contacts and more aggressive driving that's either you driving aggressively and it being a fun aggressive race like you would see in real life, or maybe someone just makes a bit of a mistake, but that mistake doesn't necessarily mean it's going to completely ruin your race outright. It's not like iRacing where the tiniest of tickles causes your car to explode as if you're made out of nuclear silly putty, or even ACC or AC1 and many other simulators. You know, you're not going to pinball off people. You're actually going to be able to survive a little bit of a knock. I think the only other sim that really does car contacts and netcode as good as this is Race Room. So the online driving and racing experience, given that it's got the splits, the ranking, the netcode, I actually think it's really, really fantastic online racing. And if you're a fan of GT3, LMP2 and LMDH, it's a great package. I think they've actually done a really good job with that. Now, moving on from that component, and we're still on the positives here, brace yourselves guys. What I want to talk about as well are the physics, and we've already talked about the other cars in other videos, but since this update and with these GT3 cars, I do find as well that the physics of the vehicles are really quite nice. Now, you can obviously always nitpick over physics, and people always argue what's more or less realistic in an ultimate sense, but all told, at the crux of it, with LMU, especially with the GT3 cars, I don't think you can massively fault the physics in this game. Like, the tyres feel really nice to drive, or the way the vehicles move around, how much control you have over them, how much bite and grip the cars have. It's really quite satisfying how they purchase the road, and it's also really satisfying that there's quite a lot of depth going on with the tyres. You do notice as you're going through a corner, the tyres purchasing and then losing a bit of grip and repurchasing, and that happening in a really quite a quick and snappy way. Also in a very predictable way, and also the general handling and behaviour of the vehicles is super predictable, as you would actually expect of a GT3 car. When it comes to other sims, personally, ACC for example, I actually think it drives quite realistically easy. It's very forgiving, however I just find it super dull and boring to drive. Whereas iRacing, the tyres just turn off at the limit, so it just removes gameplay entirely from you, it removes driving style from you. Whereas I'd say LMU gives you quite a lot of freedom as a driver. Obviously, it will have its own meta and specific way to be driven quickly, and aliens will then start exploiting that. But I would say for your average person playing Le Mans Ultimate, the physics will be really compelling, really satisfying, and offer a lot of depth and nuance to what they're doing. I would, if you're going to pin me down on this, which people like to pin me down, unfortunately not beautiful supermodels, but people like to pin me down, I would say that LMU physics, generally speaking, are way better than iRacing, a lot better than Automobilista 2. I would say most aspects of the tyres are more realistic than the original Assetto Corsa. However, there's one massive thing that's a big problem with LMU, which we'll go into when we start getting to the negatives, but we're still on the positives here. Brace yourselves, guys. So, yeah, the handling, though, all told, really good fun, lots of depth, and interesting stuff with how the tyres heat up, how they wear out, and it does seem very natural. So I think that's really fantastic. It's also what most people would want from a racing simulator, and I actually find it more enjoyable to drive than Automobilista 2 and ACC. And actually, I could see a lot of ACC fans migrating to this as a simulator that they would potentially gel with quite well. Just seems that that's a logical thing, whereas I could see iRacers maybe getting onto it, but iRacing's so different from this, I think they might find it harder to gel with, if that makes sense. Regardless of what's more or less realistic, just saying based off people that have developed skills with various simulators and their expectations, I think this sim is going to be a lot more drivable for ACC players, or even players of rFactor 2. It will click, I think, more immediately, whereas you're going to have to relearn reality to play this compared to iRacing. And also, if you drive fast in Automobilista 2, again, this drives very different from Automobilista 2. Now, Le Mans Ultimate is also going to offer a online subscription service for the multiplayer. I've not really delved deep into the details of that to really have a properly formulated view or opinion on it. I can see that there's some positives to it. especially if you have a yearly fee that unlocks everything, which is one of the options. But then I could also see it being a bit confusing with the lower tier options where you buy stuff and then you have to buy a subscription, and I think that could end up confusing things. So we'll just have to see how that pans out. It's not necessarily de facto bad, but we'll see. We'll do another video on that in the future. But yeah, basically, not being too critical, I think most people would really like this. There's a lot to look forward to it. It fits in nicely within the general landscape of sim racing. I think now it's actually a pretty great title. And especially, you know, if you like Le Mans racing, which is what this is about, I think it does a really good job of capturing that general vibe and the tracks and the experience and what you'd expect. So I'd say really good job by the developer. Now I put myself in the mindset of someone that's run out of milk and tea bags, and we get even more critical. The worst part of this game, and this is going to be controversial because I think the bar is so low in sim racing, especially following on from ACC, and also because I think a lot of sim racers they've never experienced this properly, so they just don't have the reference for it. So this is controversial, but I'm talking from a lot of experience, having played all loads of simulators and been blessed by the Holy Church of Force Feedback. You guessed it, guys. You knew it was coming. The force feedback in this game, right, it's workable and a lot of people will think it's fine, and I'd even say in many ways it's better than ACC's force feedback. But I think most of that is actually because I think the physics in this game are better or more interesting, more nuanced than ACC, which helps then make the force feedback more interesting and nuanced. However, the force feedback in this game is utterly useless for feeling exactly where the grip is whilst you're driving, and to feel exactly where the limit is and where the ideal limit is and what you should be doing in terms of how much throttle, how much brake, how much slip you should be handling. Now, I think a lot of people don't notice this because it's an incredibly easy simulator to drive. Again, that's not a bad thing. GT3 cars should be quite easy. This video, the game, we had a bug where we got no force feedback. This entire race here in this video is with zero force feedback spontaneously, and yet it was actually, in some ways, it was better to drive with no force feedback, because the force feedback in some ways even gives some like contradictory information or false information that's off-putting to actually being able to drive the vehicle. But the main thing is, again, if you're an average person, you don't really know any better, the force feedback's great for catching the rear of the car. It's great for curbing, suspension. When you brake, you'll feel a tug. All that stuff's great, but crucially, it really lacks any dynamic range for the front end or subtle slip once the suspension's already loaded up. A very similar problem that ACC had. Also, it feels like there's speed dependent damper on the steering, on the force feedback, not the actual steering, but that then gives you the impression that the car's super vague at the centre, when it actually maybe isn't. If you drive it with no force feedback, it's like, oh, actually maybe it's okay. But there's so much weirdness in the force feedback, it actually makes the game worse to drive. Now, I know you can have the whole argument. We'll do a separate video on this about realistic force feedback and what you can feel and can't feel. Power steering in GT3 cars makes force feedback muted. But at the end of the day, we're not driving remote control cars, playing a racing simulator, and you need to be able to feel what the car's doing to actually drive a race car properly. Like, you need to be able to feel the grip of the tyres. Maybe even watch our video on AMS2's custom force feedback file and what we talk about in that. Again, this upsets people that don't know this sort of stuff. They've never maybe played AC1 properly with the force feedback set up well, or they've not identified the components of the force feedback that are relevant. But yeah, all told, I would say this is marginally better than ACC, but then there also seems to be some weird inconsistency to the force feedback. And for me, that really, really ruins the enjoyment of this game and really throws me off. Though I could drive it like a robot, but it's just makes it super, super dull to drive. Another thing that was really weird about this is that I find that the engine notes, the cockpit engine notes, don't seem to line up with the RPM too well, or the depth of the note, or there's just something off with the engine note that makes me accidentally shift into neutral. You can put shift protection on, and you know, other sims operate differently, but it's not really about accidentally shifting into neutral. It's more to do with the fact that I never feel like the RPM is lining up with the actual tone of the engine, or there's a lack of richness to the tone of the engine. It just doesn't line up. And I say I play Race Room, iRacing, AC1, AMS1, Richard Burns Rally, loads of sims where I'd be like, oh, it lines up, and you might like or dislike the way they sound. I don't necessarily mind the way the vehicles sound in this. I think there's nice richness in general to like the transmission whine, and the tyre skid sounds fantastic, and just the engine note. It's not like it's wrong. It sounds quite like an onboard would sound in a real car if you listen to it, real car onboards. But there's just some bizarre disconnect with the note and the RPM that you're at. And I think maybe it's on the lower range of the RPMs. It's like you just can't hear what the engine's doing or something. I don't know. But ever since launch, this has completely thrown me off with this title. And then also the engine sounds, I think, make it feel as if you're driving really slowly in this game. Even in like LMDH, LMP2, I have a really poor perception of speed in this title. And I think it's the sound, because the graphics I think are quite great, the road textures are nice, all the other details are great, so I think again there's just something a bit weird with the sound. It's hard to put your finger on it. So that is really, those are my two real biggest complaints. But to be fair to Le Mans Ultimate, I say most sim racers, I don't think they realise how good force feedback can be. Like, they just don't know. So it doesn't really matter, does it? If Le Mans Ultimate is how it is, and most people will be perceiving it as fantastic, especially coming from ACC, which was deathly awful with its force feedback. Again, people will argue you to death on this. So, yeah, so maybe it doesn't matter so much. And I haven't heard other people mentioning the sound stuff. So apparently I seem to be noticing things that other people don't. So it's great for Le Mans Ultimate, because it means most of it's going to be very popular for the vast majority of players. But I'm giving you guys my honest, critical view from my personal experience of playing way too many sims over the years. But yeah, in terms of the update as well, though, I mean, this is no longer negative zone. I've had a sip of tea. We're back in the positive land. Some of the other content is still the same, basically. Obviously, I don't think that content was particularly bad or needed massively fixing anyway. So all that stuff stayed the same, and it's just general constant improvement. And I think you have to really hand it to the developers. I think they're doing an absolutely cracking job on this. I forgot to mention it in the positives. One thing I really love about this, and I know this throws a lot of people off when they watch my videos, they're like, why is the locked horizon on? Why is there so much camera filtering? For me, I get quite motion sick or eye fatigue doing 10-hour live streams with the road bouncing up and down due to it being locked to car. So I put locked to horizon on and neck filters and things on. And this game does a really good job of that. So massive credit to the developers for actually putting stuff like that in the game. AMS2, for example, the locked to horizon settings and the camera filtering is terrible. In fact, even in ACC and AC1 and many other sims, it's only really iRacing and LMU and rFactor 2 that now has really good built-in camera filtering. So I really appreciate that. That's for me personally. I really appreciate that. So yeah, there you go, guys. Really, that is a big rundown of it. A lot of you will go, is it worth getting? And I would say it's a difficult one to really say to you. Like, obviously, if you like GT3 and Le Mans type content and you want to jump in multiplayer race with good netcode, I'd say yeah. I think vast majority of people would really, really enjoy this. VR players, I think the game doesn't perform particularly awesome in VR. You're going to be much better off with Automobilista 2, Original Assetto Corsa. iRacing's a bit hit or miss, so I would say for VR players, I've not tested this with this specific build. I imagine it should work a bit better with this build, but I was already getting reports that a lot of people are having some issues with VR. So, and this game engine has never really been the best for VR support. So I'd say if VR is like your crux, maybe you just try it on Steam and demo it. It's one of those things. But it has improved in performance. But yeah, VR, you probably, especially if you're doing single player, you're probably better off with MS2. And I did forget to mention it because I'm an idiot, I'm incompetent. Single player in this game, the AI is actually pretty reasonable. It's not the best of AI, but it's not the worst of AI. I would say it's kind of swings and roundabouts on a par with Automobilista 2 AI in some ways. We did a full-length race on Imola, and it was quite nice. Wasn't the most involving thing or the most exciting thing. AI are slow at the start of a race still, so if your goal was like pure single-player racing, and maybe you're used to like the F1 Formula 1 titles, or even, as I say, AMS2 or iRacing AI, it's not as good as them, but it's passable for you to have an engaging time with the AI. That was just me testing it with GT3 though. I've not tested the multi-class stuff. That used to have problems. I can't comment on that. Maybe someone can in the comment section. But there you go. That is a from the brain rundown of the most pertinent components as I could see them from about 5 or 6 hours of driving this simulator since the update. Hopefully this was a useful video, and hopefully you got to subscribe and unsubscribe. That's the whole point of this channel. So until the next one though, guys, thanks very much for watching. Make sure you bind a force feedback reset button so you don't have this problem of no force feedback in a race. And until the next one, guys, take care, happy tea drinking, and goodbye.